So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Prey to us all. So Prey is a UX engineer who just wants everyone to talk to each other. She advocates for accessibility, content-first universal design, mobile-first CSS, regular usability tests, closer, design, dev, test collaboration, and growing junior talents. Here to tell us all about accessibility testing and how to use screen readers, please join me in welcoming Prey Songprasad.
Thank you. So, post-lunch slump. How are you all feeling? Seen this list, butts in the seat, which is good for me. I'm a bit less nervous. Who here has actually used a screen reader? Excellent, that's what I want to see. So for those of you who have used screen readers before, what's happening here? For those of you who have used a screen reader before, please don't judge. This is just Basics 101, and if my proficiency is not up to your standards, just be forgiving. And for those who haven't used a screen reader before, hopefully we can make this a little less intimidating for all of you who perhaps will go back and try this later today, or tomorrow, or Monday, whatever day that works. I am a UX engineer, hence I am at a testing conference. I'm a spy, clearly. But also I'm here with a very similar purpose as Jasmine in an earlier talk. Basically, first, yes, I want us to talk to each other. I want all of us to shift left. I also want to find ways that we could collaborate together more often and in a much more sensible way. I also host Web Access Club, an accessibility podcast that is launching sometime later this year. Context is that I have been in the New Zealand tech industry for about 8 years now. I've always specialized in UI front-end work. And so naturally, accessibility is just a part of my practice, my UI-focused front-end practice. And all these years, I owe a significant part of my career to the testers I've worked with. Now, because I have an agency background, most of the testers I've worked with in the past, digital agency, they are more focused on manual testing. But that also means that I've seen all sorts of ways, creative ways, that my code can be broken in different browser, different phones. Oh wait, different browsers inside a phone released 2 years back on this specific version of Android. And so I have an appreciation for this craft, right? For you all creative souls who are in there using my product and finding ways, unexpected ways to use it, so that we can make sure that if users happen to stumble upon that particular way of using it, they're not experiencing a negative user experience. And that is something I strongly value in your practice. Now, over the last few years, I have been trying to convince people in different roles across the business to please do accessibility, please care about it, and please implement it. But every time I approach someone for the first time, they're like, who's this person coming up to my team and asking, do you need any help with anything accessibility related? Or do you need help understanding some user needs or screen readers? I get these kind of reactions, right? Unimpressed, some horrified by more work, and some just have no idea about how this can even integrate with the workflow. And for testers, that naturally means a lot more things to consider before we say, yes, this is a pass. So when I was going around the business, I was a little bit disheartened at first, right, when seeing that reaction, because I'm going in with, here are all these users we have been neglecting all this time. Can we please now make sure that they can also access our products? But seeing that kind of reactions, I had to take a step back and go, why is that? Why do we get this sort of reaction when we mention accessibility? And what I realized is, it's just caused by fear of the unknown. Because how many of us actually deal with people with disabilities on a daily basis? Yes, perhaps we might deal with someone with mild visual disability, color blindness, tunnel vision. Perhaps they can't legally drive, but they can still function and work normally like everybody else. You wouldn't have noticed unless they told you. But how many of us actually works next to a blind person or someone with really severe case of ADHD? Because these people are not very visible in my everyday life, when I first thought about accessibility, it just fills me with dread. It's like, oh my God, okay, so the blind use screen reader, the people with ADHD and cognitive disability needs responsive layout view, dyslexia people might need like a slightly different font size or different style completely, it doesn't suit our branding. And the list goes on, the list of requirements or things to consider goes on. So I understand that, right? That is why I'm here today. I'm not going to cover everything about disability. That's a whole conference, right? 2 days conference minimum to do. So no, we're not going to cover everything about disability. We're not even going to cover all of the possible assistive tools that people with disabilities could use to access your product. I'm covering one, and I'm showing a real quick demo of how this loosely works. Just again, so that it can become a little less intimidating and hopefully a little more fun. But we need to first understand what on earth is a screen reader. True to its name, it is an assistive technology, just like my glasses, but it is a software that is designed to read digital content and interfaces. It helps users who cannot perhaps look at the screen for whatever reason to be able to still use and understand what the content is trying to tell them or what services are available for them to access. I am emphasizing on the word software here. Screen reader is a software that helps you access other software. This is why stats and tracking and finding out how many people use screen readers on your website or apps is really hard to find, because it is not a requirement for apps to report to each other about whether users have the same app installed or is currently using this. Assistive tool is just a way to let people access information. As a web developer, I often forget that is the real reason why assistive tool like screen reader exists. Because I live solely on the web when I'm working. I only think, all right, this is how a screen reader works with a web. But as soon as I have to try to navigate or use it to navigate outside of my web environment, that's a slightly different mindset, control, or expectation, or even a user experience completely. Now, we've talked briefly about what is a screen reader, right? I'll show you in a minute as well if you haven't got a clearer idea. When I first learned about screen readers, I thought that only those who are completely blind use a screen reader. Surely, right? Because I mean, if you have partial use of your sight, why would you even use a screen reader? And when I heard the word blind, I always visualize someone with a guide dog or with a walking stick, walking along the footpath using those little braille bumps on the footpath. And that's all I thought of when I heard the word blind. But I was so wrong. As I mentioned, many blind people use screen readers, yes, but it's also important to note that people can be blind in all sorts of different ways. Blindness is a spectrum. You might be able to see shapes and form, you might be able to see colors, but you might not be interpreted how it looks or what it is, or perhaps maybe you're legally blind, where yes, I could still walk safely and talk to you without any aid of a guide dog or stick, but it's just not good enough for me to drive a car without especially strong glasses. Or maybe even with glasses, I'm not even allowed to drive. So even if I could see shapes coming towards me, I might not be able to actually understand who is coming towards me. And therefore, when we think of people who use screen readers, it's people on different spectrum of blindness. And not all blind people use a screen reader, only a few. The next group of people is perhaps not as common, right? We don't often think of this crowd, and it's only over the last few years that we're starting to think and empathize more with the neurodiverse crowd. But imagine people with any kind of learning, not disability, but perhaps like learning abilities. When you're young, you're sitting in a big kindergarten group, a teacher sits down and tell your story. Everyone has their books open, they're reading along, you're using your sight to read the text, but you also hear the teacher reading those words out. And that aids your learning when you're younger, right? So if you have different learning abilities, you would want to use everything, all your senses and sensory of your body to learn things. And therefore, yeah, people who maybe, I can read walls of text, but I just can't comprehend it. I can just understand it better if it is then read out to me. Some of these people do use screen readers to help aid comprehension. Next, this may or may not become a surprise to you, but tools like Alexa, Google Homes, Google Maps, when you're talking to it, some of its function is essentially as a screen reader. If you ask, what is the weather tomorrow for Wellington, to whatever tool you're asking, it has to get that information from somewhere. And sometimes that might not be an API with the data that comes through. Sometimes they're just scraping off a website from that service that you're using. Or you ask, please go to Countdown website and buy 3 bananas. How does these assistive tools have both ability to understand your voice dictation and then reads the information of the checkout out to you? So if we think of it like that, the things that enable all these things, for the web anyway, is HTML. Then the last one is lazy old me. Ever since I started learning to use a screen reader, I have used it in 2 ways. One is to test that my stuff work, and 2 is to actually read blog posts, because some of those technical blog posts are long and tedious, and it's 4:30 p.m. and I don't want to comprehend anything else. I just want to hear it read out to me. Yes, it sounds robotic, the screen reader sound that is, but at least it's another way for me to consume the same information in an efficient manner that doesn't always need to use my eyes. That screen reader, in essence, is a classic case of the curb cut effect. And if you haven't heard of curb cuts, you know those things that dips between the road and the footpath so that perhaps people in wheelchair could then cross the road safely without flipping their wheelchair over? Yeah, but the thing is, a mother with a stroller would benefit from that. A delivery person carrying weights and weights of goods trying to cross the road also benefit from that particular curb cut. And that is an example of the way a product that is designed for the most in need of that feature would inadvertently become good design because it benefits so much more. And that's an example of screen readers. Not just the blind who uses it. People of different abilities could also use it. Now, enough waffling, right? I've done it for the last, well, I've misread the time. So let's actually get into the live demo. I'm gonna be brave here and do a live demo while we're on, so wish me luck here. So we're going to play a little bit, because that's a talk, right? We're gonna play with a screen reader. So if I make a mistake, I'm playing. I'm not teaching you. If you want to learn about screen readers and how to actually use it, there's plenty of YouTube videos, probably taught by an actual blind person or an actual specialist. I'm just a noob who's just trying to learn. So let me try switching on a screen reader. All right, I'm gonna pause you there. So when you're learning screen readers, it's important to learn how to start the screen reader and to stop the bloody thing. Just because, right? It took me 3 meetings like live meeting presenting how to use a screen reader to actually learn how to properly, consistently stop a screen reader, or 3 different ones, because I now learned how to use NVDA as well. So that's an example. Now, when you first land on a screen reader, when you first turn on the screen reader on the browser, usually it would be in the browse mode, where it would just read every single thing that has remotely text content on the page. It would say a button called follow. It would say an image called whatever alt text that is. That is why it's so important to make sure that your images and your graphics do have text in it. Because again, if I can't see the screen, I'm just hearing nothing if it's all images. So text is important. That's browse mode. There's another way that you could use a screen reader to then navigate the page. That is called probably a focus mode or control mode. That is where the user themselves are using the keyboard to tab or to use shortcut keys in order to navigate. You could go, so I'm pressing tab, it goes to the next element that I could interact with. So if I'm using a mouse, I imagine that I can click on this and it would do something to this interface.
Yes, Mr. Curtis. You are currently on to click this link. Press Control Option.
That's an example of a link. And you notice how every HTML element has a name, right? It has a name button, has a name link, has a name nav, select, input. Those are important. Those mean something to screen readers, and it is announced like this. So if you use a div or your dev use a div or a span and then make it look like an inbox, then the screen reader is not going to pick it up. They're not going to take that as something that a user could interact with. It just does not understand. So understanding HTML properly is really important.
The first 10% more, then you pop up the next button. You are currently on the button to display them.
Cool.
Follow that ESP first, then you add slash remove that ESP quotes from lists. Leave that ESP quotes. Menu item, group, as new window.
Yep. So yeah, that's a real quick way, but there's one last way before we close off of how to actually navigate with a screen reader. So let's say you're trying to look for information in a Wikipedia article, right? And Wikipedia article is long. So if I'm a sighted user, I'll just quickly have a scroll and glance through all the headings or all the main, like first 5 words of each paragraph, right? And then quickly get the glimpse as to like which part of the page has the information I'm after, or does it even have it at all? Screen reader users can do the same. They can navigate these pages by links, by headings, by things you can interact with. And so we could have a look now, real quick. So I'm pulling up a thing called the rotor. In NVDA and Windows, there is a similar tool that is called, the elements list. So you can see that you could.
Windows Ops menu. Links menu.
Yep. That is a lot of links, right? It's fine, it's not a problem. But it shows that like basically if you don't mark something up as a link, the thing that when you click on would go to the next page, it would not appear on this thing. So if your content is resource like that are meant to give people information like the COVID website, if you don't mark up your links to how to get more information about perhaps getting how to use my vaccine pass, or how to get more information about what is the vaccine supposed to be for, what types of vaccine do I have options for. If you don't mark those up at links, if someone's trying to navigate from homepage, they're not going to find it here. So they have to use other means in order to navigate, and hopefully you mark something in heading, in something you can track with, or within the landmark, which can be articles, headings, mains, so it lets you hit and jump to. But as you notice here, I haven't used my mouse since I started showing you how to use a screen reader, or how screen reader kind of works. But that's because mouse is a device for sighted people. And that is something we need to all remember. The primary control and the most reliable way to control your computer and the web is actually by keyboard, because you can't really miss typing. Well, you can actually, but you can't. But keyboard is way more reliable than your shaky hands, who, if you have some health conditions where your hands are shaky, you cannot use a mouse anyway. So it's more reliable for you to tab using a keyboard. So in essence, if you are testing your app and you make sure that it is keyboard accessible, you're more than halfway there to help make sure that your app is friendly to screen readers. Then of course, if you do also run a screen reader through your apps or your website, and you're finding things like, oh, landmarks doesn't make sense, or perhaps your page supposed to have, like, it has 7 different visual headings, but only 4 of them are presented here, then that is a problem, right? Because we should not be separating experiences for sighted users and non-sighted users. Because imagine if I'm working with a non-sighted colleague and we're looking at the same resource. I'm saying, yeah, go to that heading. And they're like, what heading? That is you're creating an exclusive experience. Okay, so let's actually stop this. Oh, nope. Fine, go away. I'll use it. It was actually working well when I was testing earlier, but never mind. The nature with live demos. Right. So, what is screen reader testing, right? It is pretty much exploratory testing. Sure, you can automate some of these stuff. You can make sure that things can be tabbed to, and you can use keyboard to it. But seeing as how there are 3 or 2.5 ways to navigate the page, and people have freedom to navigate the page however they want, depending on their personal mental model, you can't really unit test that stuff. The only way for you to work out whether the interface makes sense to a user who does not use their site to access your tool is to actually explore and play around. I've always admired how curious and creative you testers are. Even if you're not testers, if you're creative and you're here, I mean, you're curious enough, right? Before I leave, the last thing I want is to be the only person in my team who knows how to use a screen reader. That is a sad way to be as a developer. Where are my QAs to help make sure that I don't shit all over the place? Or please stop me from releasing stuff that is not useful for my readers. Software development is a team sport. We need to help each other out. And by you also learning a little more, not just about screen reader today, but if you're curious, you can go and learn about any assistive tools out there that you have access to, and try playing around with it, and bring that back to your team. Create a club, make it a part of the way you work. I mean, there's no harm. Again, you don't have to do it all at once. As you're learning, you can just start implementing things that you understand. Start small. Start with headings. Start with image having text. You don't have to be too ambitious to make sure that your product will eventually be accessible by a larger group of people. And frankly, these days, the disabled individuals doesn't have that many options. If your thing is accessible to them, oh man, they'll make the most loyal customers ever. And by you saying that, yes, I care about you, and you are part of a process, you've enabled that future that hopefully one day we'll have more people with disabilities working alongside us openly and proudly, because our tools and the things we're making and the way we're making things does not exclude them because we forgot about them. So I want to encourage us all to be curious today. Look around, ask, what are the types of users out there? What are the tools out there? How do I use a screen reader that comes pre-shipped with my computer? Or how do I install a free one? Does my software sound weird using these tools? By being curious, you would then eventually ask, what are the user problems? You would want to go and join those research sessions that Jasmine was talking about. I want us all to keep that childish enthusiasm in all of us. And yeah, go out there and try to make a better world. Test the heck out of my stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know what this means. We've got time for questions. Who has a question? Okay, up the back there.
In regards to accessible testing, so is there any related law in New Zealand that's actually kept looking at requirements.
Cool. So the question was, is there a legal requirement in New Zealand or a standards around accessibility? So for government website, there is. You have to meet a WCAG 2.1 AA standards. A heads up is that WCAG is being updated. 2.2 is coming out and it's going to include more neurodiverse crowds. So if you're working on government websites or apps, please be aware of that. But for companies, there's no requirement. It is completely opt-in. So it is up to enlightened companies, enlightened testers, enlightened developers, designers to actually implement it on a private sector in New Zealand. But if you do operate in the US and most likely EU in the future, you will be required to actually make that happen. You have Domino's being in a lawsuit for many years over their inaccessible websites. You have Beyonce's site being sued. So you're hedging against a risk of being sued if your product operates overseas by making sure you at least follow the minimum criteria of 2.1 AA.
Awesome. Any other questions? Here's one. Not far to throw. Oh, fantastic.
How would you advise companies to implement accessibility from the ground up? What's the first step?
Thing is, it cannot be done just from ground up. I can tell you that now. And that's why lawsuits are usually, unfortunately, handy to force the upper people to then create a policy. Because let's say you have one team, right, who cares about accessibility. We talk about it to each other, we educate each other, we perhaps have a little mini communities in the company, and we, talk about accessibility with each other. And you might do it on a day-to-day basis. But if you're a larger company, that one team is not really going to impact other teams. Your priorities is different from their priorities. So in order to make accessibility really a thing within the company, you do need a team that helps educate people on accessibility. That's what Zero is doing now, actually. You will need a community within the company of people who are interested, who are on the day-to-day, everyday ground, who will champion it. Then you will also need the leadership to go, right, as a part of definition of done, or as a part of like a modernizing project, for example. Your new app or your updated version must from now on start working towards accessible experience. Because in smaller companies, you might be able to do it from ground up, but in larger corporations, you need buy-in from up there. And it takes a while. Sometimes it helps to actually create empathy workshops where you bring users with disabilities in and actually ask them to use their preferred tool or setup to actually use your product. And that is very eye-opening too. But it's not a silver bullet. And it doesn't mean you know everything about everyone with disabilities. But that's a good start if you want to start convincing management.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Prey once more.